Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Lin Li asked if they were interested in going with him, but he was clearly trying to tell them that he would definitely be exploring the island even if they were not willing to take the risk. The people present were all elites who could obviously tell what Lin Li meant. In particular, Elvin of the Glitter Gold Trade Union was a master of inscription himself, and when he heard that the abnormality on the island was actually caused by a mage, he was immediately interested. He said with some excitement, "Since all of this was caused by a mage, I have to go and take a look." Immediately afterwards, Claus and the others also stated that they were willing to go with Lin Li to explore the island. However, they did not sound as excited as Elvin. After all, inscription was not for everyone. Even though many mages had some knowledge in inscription, they could at most draw some ordinary magoths, and the magoths that they were facing now were beyond what they dared to think about. Therefore, the power of magoths seemed to be irrelevant to others. They were naturally much less attracted to. The reason that those people agreed to go to the island to explore was mostly for Lin Li's sake. They wanted to take the opportunity to get closer to the Tower of Dusk. To them, getting on good terms with the Tower of Dusk, and especially Lin Li, a sanctuary powerhouse, was obviously more important than obtaining an unknown magoth. However, just when everyone agreed in unison to tag along to the island, Joseph of the Mithril Alliance put forward a different opinion. "President Felix, we don't know anything about the island, so I'm afraid it would be inappropriate if we wasted too much time here and ended up missing the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration. Besides, we have already deviated from our original course, which is going to cause some delay." That made the crowd a little surprised. Joseph was no longer a child. How could he have failed to understand that Lin Li had already made up his mind to explore the island? Of course, Joseph made sense too, because no one was certain of the situation on the island and the hidden dangers of the magic tower. If they ended up delaying their journey by half a month, they would miss the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration. However, most of the people were more concerned about their relationship with the Tower of Dusk. Therefore, after hearing Joseph's objection, Claus, the patriarch of the Caesar family, said, "It's just a national celebration. If we miss it this year, we'll just attend the one next year. Besides, it's just a small island. President Felix is a sanctuary powerhouse. He might just come out quickly after entering." Elvin of the Glitter Gold Trade Union was a little displeased too. There was a powerful magoth right before him, and yet someone was preventing him from studying it. That was beyond tolerable and akin to denying a famished person food. Hence, Elvin, who had always been eloquent, proudly said, "What do you know? Maybe it's the pinnacle piece of a Gilded Kingdom. Just look at the magical elements in this space. The magoth must be incredible. The Gilded Kingdom's celebration is nothing compared to this. If you're in a hurry, you may leave." "You must be kidding. This is the endless ocean. What do you mean we can go if we're in a hurry?" Joseph was immediately speechless. Lin Li ignored Joseph's objections and instead said to the others, "Don't worry. Since the island was discovered by all of us together, we will split the spoils equally, even if the only thing of value on the island is the magoth. Master Elvin and I will share the benefits with you guys if we get anything out of studying it." The people initially agreed to follow Lin Li to explore the island not for the sake of obtaining benefits, but for getting close to the sanctuary powerhouses. However, now that Lin Li had agreed to share the benefits with them, it was a pleasant surprise. Although the vast majority of them did not have much knowledge in inscription, they could tell from the abnormality on the island that the magoth that caused it was extremely powerful. If they were relying only on their own skills, they probably would not be able to study and use it. Now, they were only going to accompany Lin Li to the island to take a look. If they could get some benefits too, it would be a free advantage. As soon as he heard Lin Li say this, Joseph looked at the expressions of the people around him and knew that he wasn't going to get the support from any of them. He had no choice but to helplessly say, "Since that's what you guys think, I won't say anything." Claus patted Joseph's shoulder with a joyous smile and said, "That's right, Joseph, think about it. You won't suffer a loss when you're with President Felix. Back then, we managed to gain lots of benefits from Prince Bahir's mausoleum because President Felix was with us. Otherwise, we might not have been able to come out alive." However, the experience in Prince Bahir's mausoleum was not a beautiful memory for Joseph. Although they had made some gains, the Mithril Alliance had incurred losses in the end, and Joseph was stripped of his position as the helmsman because he failed to handle the relationship with the Tower of Dusk well. Having his sore spot rubbed was embarrassing in the first place, so when he heard Claus mention the matter of Prince Bahir's mausoleum, Joseph's expression immediately became sullen. Lin Li did not let the star continue to approach the island, but led the crowd to leave the ship directly and move towards the island using the power of flight. On the island, the magical elements had accumulated to a rather terrifying degree. Although the star had a strong defense, it was difficult to block the penetration of the magical elements, and that would not be good for the various magic facilities on the vessel. The representatives of the forces of the breezy plains on the star basically had legendary level strength, and even though the legendary level sword sages could not fly far, they would have no problem flying to the island from the star. Soon, Lin Li and other people arrived at the mysterious island, but they did not fly directly to the center of the island, and instead chose to explore the edges. One reason was that they weren't certain what dangers existed on the island, and the other reason was that the magical elements in the center of the island formed a huge vortex that made it difficult for them to maintain their power of flight. The natural environment on this island was quite good, and the crowd entered a dense forest upon landing. Although the denser the magical elements in the space, the better for mages, there had to be a limit for everything. When the concentration of magical elements in the space exceeded the limit, it would be unbearable. As a sanctuary powerhouse, Lin Li could endure in such an environment, but the other legendary powerhouses began to find it unbearable, as evidenced by the looks of dismay on their faces. As soon as they entered this place, they immediately felt a feeling of suffocation, as if there was no air for them to breathe in this space except for the magical elements, which were continuously and forcibly surging into their bodies without care for their intentions. Fortunately, the people who followed Lin Li over were all legendary powerhouses. Otherwise, those who were weaker would probably expand and burst like an airbag under the crazy infusion of magical elements. After a few moments of adjustment, the crowd gradually adapted to the environment. At the very least, they were not as uncomfortable as when they first arrived. Besides, their comfort was not the only problem. After all, the difference between the environment here and the outside was drastic. The mana required for a spell to be cast was 10 times the norm, and that was definitely not a good thing. They might end up hurting themselves or their companions. When everyone had adjusted to the state, Lin Li made arrangements for the team, and they began exploring towards the center of the island. However, just after exploring the forest for a short distance, Lin Li and the rest of the group encountered an attack from magical beasts. The ones that attacked them were a few single-horned minotaurs that were very common in Anral, and were at most level 15. Basically, such magical beasts were often food in Anral. However, the ones here were obviously different from the ones that were commonly found in Anral. They all seemed to be on steroids, as their bodies were twice or thrice that of normal ones, and they also had power that was close to the legendary level. When they charged out of the surroundings, they shuddered incessantly. Of course, with the strength of Lin Li and his team, even if the strength of the minotaurs reached the legendary level, it would not be possible for them to cause much trouble. After a wave of offensive spells, almost all of them died. However, the strength of those one-horned minotaurs still amazed the people, as they never knew that those beasts that were commonly found on dinner tables could be that ferocious. Many teams that hunted them in Anral would probably change their professions upon encountering those from the island. Lin Li, who understood the void spirit Mageth, looked much less surprised. Clearly, the minotaurs had also been affected by the power of the void spirit Mageth. Among all the Mageths, there was probably none that could compare to it in terms of the ability to gather magical elements. The void spirit Mageth had existed on the island for some time, and accumulated plenty of magical elements on the island. The magical beasts would inevitably be powerful. Fortunately, it was a lone island. Otherwise, if the void spirit Mageth appeared on Anral, it would probably be possible to create an army of magical beasts of terrifying strength in no time. If a low-level magical beast like the one-horned minotaur could have strength that was close to the legendary level, what would the other high-level magical beasts become? The environment of this island reminded Lin Li of Garesco's meditation land. When it came to the density of magical elements, this place was probably not inferior to Garesco's meditation land. However, the magical elements here were forcibly sucked over, hence, they were in a state of frenzy, and were not suitable for mages to meditate and absorb. On the other hand, in Garesco's meditation land, the magical elements were equally dense, but they were mild, and could turn into the mana of mages, without requiring any conversion. After understanding the strength of the magical beasts on this island, Lin Li made arrangements for the team again. One group was in charge of combing and exploring the island. It was not that large an area, so it wouldn't take much time for the legendary powerhouses to comb through it. On the other hand, Lin Li took the rest of the people and headed straight for the magic tower in the center of the island. After passing through the dense forest, the magic tower, which had Mageths inscribed on it, finally appeared in front of Lin Li and the others. However, Lin Li did not approach it recklessly, and instead made arrangements again to allow the weaker ones to stay behind and be on guard. After carefully observing the magic tower and ensuring that there were no magic traps or magic gears, he brought the few peak legendary powerhouses to the high tower. What kind of person managed to complete such a complex Magath. As a master of inscription, Elvin couldn't suppress his excitement when he saw the magic tower. However, when he approached the tower and saw the dense Magath, he couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded again, because he couldn't understand it at all despite being a master of inscription. It seemed that the inscription knowledge involved had completely exceeded what he knew. Lin Li did not respond to Elvin, as all his attention was caught by the Magath, so he didn't hear the other man at all. Besides, when he looked at the complicated Magaths around him, he was extremely excited too because he knew that it was definitely the Divine Smith level Void Spirit Magath. Magaths of the Divine Smith level were a field that even Lin Li had never ventured into, because it had completely exceeded the limits of what humans could master, as it was the realm of the gods. Even though Lin Li was a full-time guru of inscription, he was clueless when it came to the field of Divine Smith Magaths, because reaching the realm of the Divine Smith was as difficult as obtaining a god's position. Besides, although Divine Smiths did not enter the realm of the gods through martial arts, their combat power was not worse than that of Divine Mages. At the realm of Divine Smiths, the difference between professions would be insignificant. Be it Divine Smiths or Divine Mages, their actions contained the will of a god, and they could instantly kill countless legendary powerhouses. Even sanctuary powerhouses, who were close to the realm of the gods, were still insignificant compared to the Divine Smiths. Lin Li suppressed the excitement in his heart and began to carefully study the Void Spirit Magaths on the magic tower. If he could really learn something from it, he probably wouldn't be far from obtaining godhood mentioned in the legends. However, the realm of the gods was not something that mortals could reach easily and master. Lin Li stayed there and studied for 3 whole days and nights, only to realize that he had gained nothing in the end. It was even more impossible for Elvin to get anything out of it. Instead, he seemed drained out of his energy and vigor from studying the Magath. Finally, Lin Li had no choice but to accept reality. After all, it was a Magath of the Divine Smith level. Even if he continued to stay there for another 3 to 30 years, he might not be able to reach an outcome. However, Lin Li could not waste so much time here, as there were still too many things that he had to do. Hence, Lin Li came up with a stupid solution, and that was to copy the Void Spirit Magath on the tower. Although it would not have the power of the real Void Spirit Magath, the inscription knowledge that it contained would definitely remain unchanged. Of course, it would not be easy to copy it. Although Lin Li had a lot of manpower, there were still many things that he had to do himself. Otherwise, studying it would be difficult if someone made a mistake. Lin Li picked a few mages who had a little knowledge of inscriptions, and began getting a print of the Void Spirit Magath together with them and Elvin. However, just when Lin Li reached the Magath on the door of the magic tower, the door of the tower, which had been closed, opened all of a sudden. Next, Lin Li managed to see the interior of the tower that made him overwhelmed with shock through the gap in the door. Lin Li saw a manticore that was shackled and restrained by magic chains and Magaths under the sunlight. What really frightened Lin Li was that the manticore that was being restrained was actually a 9-headed manticore. The 9-headed manticore was a magical beast that was even more terrifying than the evil eye tyrant. 9 heads represented 9 powerful affinity spells, which also meant that the 9-headed manticore's power had already reached the sanctuary realm. As soon as the doors of the magic tower, Lin Li sensed the terrifying aura that was even stronger than that of the flame dragon Lothar that he'd encountered in the Great Rift of the Eternal Darkness Altar. Back when he dealt with the flame dragon Lothar, 2 sanctuary powerhouses, the high priest of the Darkness Shrine Rog, and the evil dragon Nifa, worked together to deal with Lothar, but were ultimately defeated by it. If it weren't for the power of the Tree of Eternity, which put Lothar back into a deep slumber, none of them would have survived in the end. Even though Lin Li already had the strength of a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, he was still scared soulless upon sight of the shackled 9-headed manticore. Worse still, the magic chains and Magaths that bound the 9-headed manticore tightly actually loosened up when the door of the tower was opened. The 9-headed manticore had been locked up in there for a long time, and as soon as the binding on the body was loosened, it broke free impatiently with great power and dashed through the door of the magic tower. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, from the opening of the door of the magic tower to the 9-headed manticore breaking free. Although Lin Li was stunned, he snapped back to his senses in time, and quickly activated the power of his space robe, after which his figure immediately flashed and appeared in midair. The people around the tower acted like they had seen a ghost when they saw Lin Li as he suddenly flashed away from the front door of the tower, still feeling bewildered. After all, he was a sanctuary powerhouse who was at the pinnacle of the world. You could almost say that there was barely anything in this world that could threaten him. However, immediately afterwards, they saw the 9-headed manticore dashing out of the door of the tower, scaring the crowd out of their wits immediately. For them, the 9-headed manticore was a powerful magical beast that could contend with the gods and myths. Everyone reacted and realized why Lin Li appeared to be so flustered despite being a high-level sanctuary powerhouse. Fortunately, the nine-headed manticore seemed to have treated them as insignificant nobodies who didn't exist. As soon as it dashed out of the door, it chased after Lin Li. To the nine-headed manticore, Lin Li was the only one among the people present who was worth its pursuit. While it was charging Lin Li, the nine-headed manticore opened its mouth and roared, after which countless silver thunderbolts appeared in the air and blasted towards Lin Li. The air seemed to have become a prison where countless thunderbolts were crashing down like a tide, almost drowning the island. The roaring made the space quake incessantly too. Ordinary thunder magic spells would often come with warning signs in the form of gloomy clouds, because they used the nomological power of the world. However, the nine-headed manticore had clearly reached the level of void thunder. That was the power of the peak of the sanctuary realm, which had replaced the world laws with its own laws. It was only a step away from reaching the realm of the gods and obtaining the legendary godhood. Fortunately, Lin Li was prepared for this, and when his body flashed in mid-air, he immediately cast out his own domain world, which could be considered his own most powerful defense means at the moment. As a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, he had mastered the world laws to a fairly high degree, and the domain world that he created was probably not much inferior compared to the real world. When he was exploring the Sky Castle and fought with High Lord Osric in the end, Lin Li still had to add the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to his domain world to be able to barely block Osric's terrifying attack. However, with his current domain world, he would still have to put in some effort into fighting without the debris of the stars, but he at least wouldn't be in such a pathetic state. Now, facing the nine-headed manticore which was at the peak of the sanctuary realm, Lin Li really did not dare to be negligent at all. Hence, he immediately cast his domain world without any testing. As soon as the domain world was opened, the nine-headed manticore attacked. The endless thunderbolts converged to form a silver ocean that instantly caused Lin Li's domain world to become submerged. At this moment, Lin Li, who was in his own domain world, looked outside and saw that there were silver thunderbolts and lightning everywhere. The thunderbolts and lightning each contained terrifying power, and were constantly blasting his domain world. The aftershocks of the power that seeped in made the domain world seem apocalyptic. However, despite facing that, Lin Li didn't look as nervous as he used to, and instead seemed calm and relieved. Through the power of the attacks that the domain world sustained, Lin Li could tell that while the nine-headed manticore was powerful, it was not as difficult to deal with as he had previously thought. The nine-headed manticore was at the peak of the sanctuary realm, but its power did not contain any power of the gods, and it was still far from being a so-called demigod. The dragon corpse of the Dragon of Destruction on Cage Island back then had left Lin Li and Zoomer, the 2 high-level sanctuary powerhouses, and several pseudo-sanctuary powerhouses helpless even though they had joined forces. Similarly, the flame dragon Lothar, which appeared in the rift of the Eternal Darkness altar, had also put High Priest Rog and the evil dragon Nifa in a pathetic state, because of its power that contained a trace of the power of the gods. A trace of godly power would make a huge difference, and set one sanctuary powerhouse apart from another. There was a similar example, a level 19 archmage, who had comprehended some nomological power would be far stronger than one who hadn't. It was a fundamental difference that couldn't be made up for with strength. Of course, even though the nine-headed manticore did not have any godly power, it didn't mean that it was easy to deal with. It had power of the sanctuary realm, and 9 types of powerful affinity spells. Ordinary peak sanctuary powerhouses probably wouldn't be its match, either, let alone Lin Li. However, the fact that the nine-headed manticore did not have any godly power, at least gave Lin Li a chance to fight, and saved him from being in the hopeless state that he would be in if he faced a demigod. While sustaining his domain world, and resisting the attacks of the nine-headed manticore, Lin Li also began retaliating. A dazzling ray of light instantly emanated from the Helios scepter that Lin Li was holding, immediately causing the power of the domain world to surge. Right afterwards, countless sharp swords and spears darted out of the domain world, instantly shuttling towards the nine-headed manticore through the silver thunderbolts. However, just as the countless swords and spears came close, one of the heads of the nine-headed manticore roared, and an earthy yellow shield appeared in front of it. The shield emitted incomparably thick fluctuations of earth power, as if it was made of compressed earth. Lin Li's attack immediately collided with the nine-headed manticore's earth shield, and deafening roars filled the sky, making it seem as if the firmament was about to collapse. The aftershock of the collision had also swept towards the surroundings, and even the island below wasn't spared. The trees that had been living for years were uprooted by that power spreading towards the surroundings. At this moment, the people on the island were maximizing their power, as if they were in an apocalypse. They were barely holding on amidst the power of the aftershocks. However, even so, the few weaker ones were blown away with the trees, Fortunately, they were experienced legendary powerhouses, at least level 22 or level 23, although they were inevitably injured. Their injuries were not fatal. In the blink of an eye, the island changed dramatically, and the island that was originally lush now looked like a bald person, with only some sparse trees in the surroundings. Apart from the central tower, that was still in place, a large number of the surrounding trees were swept away, and the ground seemed to have been overturned too. Upon sight of that scene, Lin Li began to get worried about damaging the magic tower, especially since they weren't done copying the void spirit Mageth outside the tower. If it was destroyed just like that, it would be a huge pity. Hence, he immediately moved and flew towards the sea outside the island. In addition to wanting to lure the nine-headed manticore away from the island, Lin Li also hoped that it would stop appropriately and give up on fighting with him, though he would get 9 magical crystals after killing it. Lin Li didn't care about where it would go. In his opinion, 9 sanctuary-level magical crystals were far inferior to the void spirit Mageth. After all, no matter how powerful magical crystals might be, they were just tools to provide mana for people. But the void spirit Mageth was equivalent to the key to the door to the realm of Divine Smith. Of course, it was proven that no matter how intelligent a magical beast was, it was ridiculous compared to humans. What Lin Li hoped for in his heart did not happen, as the 9-headed manticore seemed to have recognized him and taken chase regardless of everything. Perhaps the 9-headed manticore desperately needed to vent its anger and resentment after being imprisoned for so many years. Faced with such a scenario, Lin Li actually wasn't disappointed. A wish was still a wish, after all. He just had to accept the truth. However, being able to lure the 9-headed manticore away from the island was already good enough for Lin Li. At least he wouldn't have to worry about damaging the void spirit Mageth. However, being able to be free did not mean that Lin Li could fight the 9-headed manticore alone. Besides, he did not plan to do so, either. The direction he lured the 9-headed manticore was exactly towards the star. At the same time, he had also summoned the elemental dragon Xiaohua, who had just awakened in Dream Garden. After devouring the magical crystal of an adult elemental dragon, Xiaohua managed to last until the end of the exploration in the Sky Castle. However, it began to fall into a deep sleep again upon returning. During its slumber, Xiaohua finally turned the power of the magical crystal into its own. Although Xiaohua's size did not change, it was no longer childlike, and its strength was not worse than any sanctuary powerhouses at this point, even though it had yet to step into the sanctuary realm or become an adult elemental dragon. In fact, purely in terms of mana, Lin Li might not hold a candle to Xiaohua even though he was a sanctuary powerhouse with nearly infinite mana. After coming out of Dream Garden, Xiaohua first circled around Lin Li twice cheerfully before turning to face the 9-headed manticore, striking it with an intimidating magic storm. The magic storm that Xiaohua was casting now was probably as powerful as a full-blown attack of a peak legendary powerhouse. The power of countless peak legendary level magic spells combined was definitely groundbreaking. If it was blasted at the island below, everything would probably vanish in the blink of an eye. After summoning Xiaohua, Lin Li did not stop, and instead took out the summoning lamp and chanted a few short incantations. Afterwards, a large swollen body that looked just like a giant worm made of flesh appeared in midair. Although there was a pair of wings on its back, they had already lost their function, and it was now just floating in the air. That monster was Lord Devourer Garl, whom Lin Li had subdued in the Well of the Sun. For some unknown reason, Angelano and Garl would argue non-stop whenever they met, and they would even show a tendency to fight. Hence, apart from letting Garl come out occasionally for a breather, Lin Li would keep him sealed in the summoning lamp most of the time. This time, he brought him along before Garl could complain to Lin Li. When he rose to midair, he was faced with the attacks of the 9-headed manticore that were like a tidal wave. Garl temporarily put aside his unhappiness of being imprisoned for so long and immediately opened his huge mouth that was large enough to devour the sky. The terrifying thing about the 9-headed manticore was the powerful affinity spell in each of its 9 heads. At the same time, it also had 9 sanctuary-level magical crystals for providing mana. Facing the 9-headed manticore that was at the peak of the sanctuary realm was akin to facing 9 powerhouses that were close to the peak of the sanctuary realm, which was not something that just anyone could tolerate. However, the Lord Devourer had the ability to devour everything, and the groundbreaking magic spells were just like a huge feast for him. If the 9-headed manticore contained a wisp of godly power, like the Dragon of Destruction's corpse, Garl would probably be sending himself onto a path to death by doing that. However, despite being massive, the 9-headed manticore's power was still considered mortal. Hence, Garl could devour it smoothly. The momentum and power of the attack of the 9-headed manticore were immediately weakened by the magic storm attack of the elemental dragon Xiaohua, and the crazy devouring force of the Lord Devourer Garl. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars flew out from the ring of endless storm one after another, their horrifying force condensing into a world sword that slashed towards the 9-headed manticore. At the same time, the star on the sea below also received a message from Lin Li through soul contact. All of the weapons rose and pointed at the 9-headed manticore that was in midair. The battleship-class magical crystal cannons, ordinary magical crystal cannons, harpoons, attack spells, alchemy arrays, and other weapons were all activated. After a few seconds of charging and bracing, all the weapons on the star roared almost simultaneously, and the various mana cannons, harpoons, and offensive spells immediately surged up from the sea and blasted at the 9-headed manticore in the air. If the 9-headed manticore had even a hint of godly power, Lin Li would probably have no choice but to flee. However, the situation was completely different now, as the attacks from the sea and the air immediately engulfed the 9-headed manticore. The large and powerful earth shield shattered with a loud thud under the blasting of the world sword. All the attacks then landed on the 9-headed manticore. After a series of roars, everything finally calmed down again, and the heavily injured 9-headed manticore fell to the surface of the sea like a meteor. However, Lin Li waved the Helios scepter in his hand, and a magic hand appeared out of thin air, scooped up the 9-headed manticore, and placed it in the ring of endless storm immediately. After dealing with the 9-headed manticore, Lin Li caved in because of the pitiful gaze in the elemental dragon Xiaohui's eyes, and allowed it to devour the magical elements on the island that had been accumulated for an unknown period of time by the void spirit Mageth. However, Lin Li wasn't that nice to Garl, as he immediately turned the summoning lamp and put Garl, whose eyes were filled with resentment, into it. Lin Li returned to the island, and everyone looked at him with much more fear and respect in their eyes, disheveled and battered. The 9-headed manticore was a powerful existence that was rumored to be able to contend with the gods according to legends, but it was destroyed just like that. That gave them a little more understanding of Lin Li's terrifying strength. Without the disturbance of the 9-headed manticore, the process of copying the void spirit Mageth was resumed, and it took another day and night before it was finally completed. After putting the elemental dragon Xiaohua, who was patting its belly and burping, back into the ring, Lin Li led the group to reboard the star. In the past few days, the damage of the star had been repaired, and it immediately set sail and left the island according to the original plan on Lin Li's order. However, the star was not in a rush, and instead maintained an appropriate speed, at which it seemed to be cruising leisurely. At the beginning, Joseph also deliberately approached Lin Li twice to ask about it, but when he saw how nonchalant Lin Li was, he had no choice but to keep mum. Of course, apart from Joseph, others also found it very strange, but they finally realized Lin Li's intentions when the star stopped near another island. In fact, Lin Li's intention was not complicated, he just wanted to take this opportunity to explore the sea. The appearance of the island with the void spirit Mageth previously was evidence that the sea here had been uninhabited for many years. Otherwise, it would have probably been discovered by others long ago before Lin Li and his sailors could even reach it. Even those who lived at sea near the coast of the breezy plains had been living there for much longer than Lin Li had. What more, the Gilded Kingdom that had dominated the endless ocean for years. If the island with the void spirit Mageth was near a certain route, the abnormal rapid accumulation of magical elements would have long caught the attention of others. Lin Li also had a huge doubt about the origin of the magic tower and the person who built it. Who could have added a divine smith level void spirit Mageth and even locked a 9-headed manticore in the tower? Lin Li had no idea where to find the answers, and had no choice but to pin his hopes on a certain island on the sea in a bid to find some clues. Of course, Lin Li wouldn't drop everything just to explore and comb the sea. He was actually just trying his luck now. It would be a good thing if he could find something, but if his efforts were futile, he would have to follow his original plan and leave the sea for further exploration later. In fact, apart from Lin Li, the others were also curious and full of doubts about the island. Hence, they didn't object to Lin Li's approach, and even seemed quite enthusiastic about the exploration. After all, who wouldn't want to make a fortune? They would really gain a massive amount of wealth if they could find some ancient ruins during the exploration. President Flick, why are we stopping again? We can see everything on this tiny island at a glance. There can't be anything hidden on it, right? Joseph initially wanted to stop talking about it, but when the star stopped again near a barren island, he couldn't help but ask about it again anxiously. In Joseph's opinion, it would be justifiable and reasonable to stop and explore whenever they encountered a forest or an island that was structured peculiarly, but he felt that there was nothing to explore on the barren island, where everything could be seen clearly at a glance. That left Joseph with no choice but to wonder if Lin Li was really trying to explore, or was simply using this excuse to dawdle. After all, The invitation to the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration this time was a good opportunity for the forces to form good relations with the Gilded Kingdom, and that would not be a good thing for the Tower of Dusk. After all, the Tower of Dusk could be considered the greatest obstacle to the Gilded Kingdom's further development in the breezy plains. Thus, the two forces were destined to become rivals. If the Gilded Kingdom roped in a few more forces of the breezy plains, the Tower of Dusk would have a few less forces on its side. That would pit them against each other. Hence, Joseph had that suspicion. If the Tower of Dusk was intentionally procrastinating so that they all missed the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration, it would undoubtedly be to a great benefit of the Tower of Dusk. Of course, Joseph was not foolish enough to bring this issue up directly. In fact, he didn't even tell anyone else about it. After all, they were on the star, and they didn't want to be thrown into the sea halfway through the journey. Besides, it was just a wild guess based on his gut feeling, which was impossible to prove until the final outcome was produced. At this point, Claus and others also found it bizarre, but they didn't voice their doubts like Joseph did, though their eyes were still filled with bewilderment. After all, this island was still too simple. In fact, it didn't even seem like an island, but rather a boulder submerged in the sea. However, Lin Li did not immediately answer to clear their doubts. Instead, he smiled and said to the crowd, "You may try to hit that boulder and see which one of you can smash it." The crowd was even more puzzled after hearing Lin Li's words, but they nevertheless proceeded to try attacking the boulder. However, the attack allowed them to witness something even stranger, as their attack spells and combat energy would all vanish without a sound after being blasted at the boulder. At first, they simply threw a few fireballs at it, but afterwards they had no choice but to increase the intensity of their attacks, and even came close to using all their power. However, the boulder remained intact. What now? They finally realized the strangeness of the boulder. They were all legendary powerhouses, who could easily smash steel into pieces, let alone a boulder. Seeing that they had stopped and walked towards him, with their faces full of confusion, Lin Li smiled, flew away from the star, and landed on the boulder. Immediately afterwards, a spear appeared in his hand. It was the spear that the debris of the star's nothingness had turned into, and contained the power to cut through all space. Holding the void spear, Lin Li slashed at the boulder randomly a few times, after which a large piece of it was cut off and fell into the sea. Finally, a ray of azure light came through. His movements also became faster and faster, so much that the outer shell of the boulder on sea was removed, revealing a large azure crystal. Is this the heart of the ocean? After seeing the azure crystal, the crowd on the star couldn't help but exclaim in astonishment. The heart of the ocean was a specialty of the Endless Ocean, a pure water series magical gemstone that was known as a holy relic of the Sea Clan during the Dark Age. However, in their memory, the largest one they had seen was only the size of a baby's fist, which was also of the highest grade. A fingernail-sized heart of the ocean could fetch a price of tens of millions of gold coins, and the value of one that was the size of a baby's fist could not be measured in gold coins at all. Apart from containing pure water series mana, the heart of the ocean also had a powerful ability to turn the attacking power of any attribute into water series mana. Of course, the absorption was limited. In addition to the volume and purity of the heart of the ocean, as well as many other factors, the strength of the wearer also had a considerable impact. In other words, the stronger the user, the greater the power. Hence, with the heart of the ocean embellished in the sea, there would be no need to worry about the problem of elimination in the future when their strength increased. Therefore, the heart of the ocean was definitely a coveted treasure for mages who cast water series spells. As long as they wore the heart of the ocean as a magical accessory, their victory in a fight against an opponent of the same level would be guaranteed. As long as the opponent's attacks did not exceed the tolerance limit of the heart of the ocean, it would be able to absorb them and replenish the mana of the mage wearing it. Now, there was a massive heart of the ocean right in front of them, which was beyond their knowledge. Besides, it was merely the part that was exposed on the surface of the sea, and they no longer dared to imagine what there was beneath the sea. After removing the stone shells, Lin Li dived to the bottom of the sea, and the crowd saw the massive heart of the ocean shaking and gradually rising out of the surface of the sea soon afterwards. Finally, when Lin Li came out of the sea holding the heart of the ocean, they managed to get a clear glimpse of its sheer size. Of course, the heart of the ocean was not exaggeratedly large to the extent that it would extend all the way to the bottom of the sea, and was probably about 10 odd meters high and wide. However, even then, it was definitely enough to make the crowd rub their eyes to take a second look. If they exchanged that massive heart of the ocean for gold coins, they would probably have enough to buy a kingdom. If it was placed in Anral, it would definitely make all mages go mad and get into a frenzy. Many might even choose to specialize in water magic for the sake of it. Holding the huge heart of the ocean gemstone, Lin Li flew back to the star and placed it on the deck with a loud thud. Seeing this scene, the crowd was almost going to lose their minds. That's the heart of the ocean. How can he just dump it onto the ground like that? What if it gets damaged? Everyone, like I said before, each one of you, will get a share of this since we found it together. Lin Li was generous enough to share the heart of the ocean with them, but of course the truth was that he knew very well in his heart that this heart of the ocean gemstone was only large in size, and a larger size did not mean that it was much more amazing. Besides, he could not make such a huge gemstone into a ring and wear it. President Felix, how can we do that? This heart of the ocean was discovered by you alone. How can we have the cheek to take it? Many of them turned his offer down immediately, but they were just being polite as their glistening eyes were glued onto the heart of the ocean on the deck. Clearly, they didn't really mean what they said. Looking at their expressions, Lin Li smiled and said, "Okay, everyone, just accept it." After saying that, Lin Li waved the void spear in his hand there and then on the deck. To their surprise, he was going to split the gemstone up right on the spot. The large heart of the ocean was quickly divided into fist-sized gemstones which he distributed to the crowd. Representatives of top forces like Claus, Alvin, and the others were given 10 pieces of the heart of the ocean each. Even Joseph, who had been urging them to hurry to the Gilded Kingdom, was given a share too. At the end of the distribution, there were still more than 30 pieces of the heart of the ocean, each the size of a human head. However, no one was jealous and unhappy. After all, being able to get a share of the heart of the ocean was a godsend for them. After dividing the heart of the ocean, Lin Li waved his hand and swept the remaining pieces into the ring of endless storm, before instructing the star to continue sailing. Lin Li was not being a fool by sharing the heart of the ocean that he had found with the crowd. In fact, the pieces of heart of the ocean gemstone that he had given away were considered nothing to him. What he truly valued was the most central part of the heart of the ocean, which was actually the real heart of the ocean. The formation process of the heart of the ocean was not like for other magical gemstones that were formed under heavy pressure over tens of millions of years. Instead, it started from a core, which was similar to other elemental lifeforms in nature. Over the years, the core would continue to absorb and accumulate water magical elements as if snowballing. When the accumulation reached a certain level, the heart of the ocean would truly become a water elemental life form. Once it was born, it would be the best of all. The pieces of the heart of the ocean that Lin Li gave away were at best just polymers of the water element, and the heart of the ocean in the usual sense. However, the core was the most valuable part, and was several times more powerful than the ones that he had given away. Apart from the great power it contained, its core was like a seed that could grow more heart of the ocean gemstones. As long as it was nurtured in a place with abundant water elements, it would constantly provide heart of the ocean gemstones. The following part of the voyage of the star was still mainly exploration, and sometimes it would deviate from the planned course. However, this time the people on the ship were no longer confused, and were instead looking forward to further exploration to see what other treasures Lin Li could find. Even Joseph, who had been urging them to hurry to the Gilded Kingdom, no longer said anything. On one hand, he knew that it would be useless to urge Lin Li as it might make everyone else angry. On the other hand, he also wanted to get more good items. In fact, everyone knew that the endless ocean was very rich in resources, but looking for precious items in the endless ocean was not easy at all. First of all, they would be prone to encountering storms on the endless ocean, and they would also face the dangers posed by the marine beasts. Even though things had been peaceful so far, and everything looked the same around them, Lin Li had given them an eye-opener on this journey, and they would have never imagined how Lin Li, the young president, could find something of value in a place that clearly seemed to be the same as everywhere else. That half of the heart of the ocean was at least exposed on the surface of the sea, and despite the thick stone shell wrapped around it, it was still visible. However, Lin Li managed to find other precious aquatic plants and water gemstones that were hidden deep under the sea, and that was simply amazing. Of course, it wasn't amazing or magical to Lin Li, be it the precious herbs or water gemstones under the sea, or even rare magical metals. They shared the same characteristic of having special magical waves. As an advanced sanctuary powerhouse, Lin Li was much more sensitive to magical waves than the legendary powerhouses. Finding some abnormal magical waves was simply a piece of cake for them. More importantly, Lin Li was not only a mage, he also had high attainments in various fields like pharmaceutics, forging, jewelry, reconnaissance, and so on. Hence, based on the abnormal magical waves, he could easily determine what was hidden on the bottom of the sea. If he could only sense magical waves, even a tiny magical wave emitted by a small fish would halt the star on its route. Of course, while getting an eye-opener, the people also gained a lot of benefits. Despite being the representatives of large and medium-sized forces who had broad horizons, they were still extremely overjoyed at this moment. Azure magical metal and deep-sea crystals were precious things in the endless ocean, that they could never buy from the Gilded Kingdom regardless of how much money they offered. However, they seemed to be encountering one at every turn here. It was simply a godsend. The star stayed in the sea for a few days, allowing Lin Li to investigate and obtain almost all of the precious and valuable things before finally sailing away and returning to their original route to the capital of the Gilded Kingdom. Around this course, ships had been coming and going for thousands of years, and anything of value had long been dug up by the Gilded Kingdom or someone else. Hence, Lin Li finally stopped his treasure hunt. The star continued sailing along the channel towards Four Seasons Island, where the capital of the Gilded Kingdom was located. After sailing for about another half-month, they passed by several islands along the way, which meant that they had gradually entered the core territory of the Gilded Kingdom. The surrounding area was also obviously no longer as desolate and quiet as before. From time to time, they could see merchant ships or fishing boats sailing in all directions. Although the star seemed to be a rare battleship in the breezy plains, it rarely attracted attention here. It was not that there were many ships there that were similar to it, but because everyone here had already gotten used to seeing all kinds of rare and peculiar ships. A massive ship like the star could barely shock them. According to estimation, they had half a day's journey to go before they would reach Four Seasons Island at this juncture. However, just when the crowd finally relaxed, waiting for the star to successfully reach Four Seasons Island, a fleet in the distance suddenly broke into the channel and approached the star. The size of the fleet was large, and there were nearly 20 battleships, which looked inferior compared to the alchemical battleships of the Gilded Kingdom, but compared to the warships of the Leaden Kingdom and Felon Kingdom, they were clearly much more powerful. However, the ships of this fleet did not bear the flag of the Gilded Kingdom, or even any flag of a trade union. As soon as they saw the fleet that did not bear a flag, they got into battle formation and charged towards them in a frenzy. Lin Li and the others immediately realized that they should have been pirates, but they were puzzled as to why a pirate's fleet could show up in the core sea territory of the Gilded Kingdom, which was a powerful maritime force. The oncoming pirate ship opened fire with a loud boom, as if a thunderbolt had struck the sea. Afterwards, continuous roaring followed, accompanied with several mana cannons. Clearly, the pirate's ship was well equipped with arms too. At the same time that the pirates' leading ship attacked the star, the other 10 ships didn't stop, and instead split into 2 teams that began surrounding the star from the flanks. 2 other pirate ships also suddenly appeared behind the star. Clearly, they had lain in ambush, and the pair was guarding the star to prevent it from escaping. Since they had already opened fire, Lin Li naturally wouldn't be kind to them. He immediately ordered the crew to start attacking the pirate ships, and the cannons on the star immediately started bombarding the pirate ships around it, while the other magical weapons started roaring too. If they were ordinary pirates, the counterattack of the star would probably cause more than half of the pirate ships to sink. However, this fleet activated a magical shield when the star began to counterattack. Magical shields on ships could only be facilitated with magic arrays or alchemy arrays, so they were much more valuable than magical weapons. Moreover, what surprised Lin Li and the others was that the magic shields on those pirate ships were obviously not ordinary, since they could block the mana cannons of the star. The magical crystal cannons on the star were only available to the Gilded Kingdom's navy, and were basically by far the most powerful magical weapons in Anral. With powerful magical weapons and a shield that could resist the bombardment of the magical crystal cannons of the ship, it was no wonder that this pirate fleet actually dared to brazenly appear in the core territory of the Gilded Kingdom. However, Lin Li couldn't help but wonder what the origin of the pirates' fleet was. It was clearly impossible for ordinary pirates to reach such a high level, since the magical crystal cannons could not break their magic shield. Were they supposed to use a sky breaker to make the pirates' ship sink? Lin Li finally became a little more serious as he carefully observed the magic shield of the battleships opposite them. However, he did manage to see some clues. When the pirates' ships were bombarded by the mana cannons, the magic shield that engulfed the attacked ship would be strengthened, while those of the 2 ships beside it would suddenly weaken. After seeing the situation, Lin Li immediately understood that the battle formation of the pirate ships was not simply an attack formation. Be it the Tower of Dusk or the Mithril Alliance and other forces, their mage legions and teams of elites would usually master a battle formation that could enhance their combat power, such as the magic net array mastered by the Tower of Dusk's mage legion. The formation that the pirates got into clearly affected the array to a certain extent. The most obvious effect was reflected in the change of magic shield. When a battleship was bombarded, other battleships that were not under fire would superimpose their defensive power onto the former to help it resist the attack. Of course, the shortcoming of this was obvious too. If more than one battleship was attacked at the same time, how would the defensive power be distributed? However, those who owned ordinary warships would probably be stunned if they encountered this situation where their attacks could not break the defense of the pirate ships. Besides, if it wasn't a fleet of similar size, how could it go to attack multiple pirate ships at the same time, and still maintain a sufficient intensity of attacks? Of course, those problems were only for others to consider. The firepower of the Star was not what an ordinary battleship could compare to. After Lin Li told his discovery to Julio, the pirate leader, who had a rich experience in battles and was in charge of issuing commands during the battle, the latter immediately developed a new battle plan for the situation. This time, the battle immediately changed, and the Star first bombarded a single pirate ship. After attracting enough defense, the backup magical weapons immediately blasted at the pirate ship at the side that was weakening. The attacks of the several mana cannons instantly broke the defense of the pirate ship and formed a few huge holes in the front and back. The sea water surged in large amounts, and the wrecked pirate ship was pulled to the bottom of the sea in the blink of an eye. Seeing that they had suffered some losses, the pirates immediately intensified their attacks on the Star without caring about their own safety at all. They were truly desperados. Although the Star was powerful, it faced a fleet of nearly 20 well-equipped ships, after all. Soon, under the strong attack of the pirate ships, the Star began to show signs of serious damage. If it wasn't repaired in time, it might cause a considerable impact on the battleship. In particular, the Star might not have been blasted by the pirates' ships, but the massive impact still caused the power system to suffer some problems. Seeing such a situation, Lin Li's heart was filled with regret. After all, it was not the Star. In the world created by Garesco, there wouldn't be such pirates that created trouble even when he was facing the High Elves fleet that had the upper hand. Of course, the Star was gradually falling under the attack of the pirate fleet, but it was not enough to make Lin Li feel worried. He just found it a pity that the Star which he had put an effort to build was worlds apart from the real Star in terms of firepower and defense. As problems began to occur with the power system, the firepower of the Star gradually began to weaken, especially the magical crystal cannons that required mana. At the same time, the magic shield that was initially very solid clearly became extremely fragile now, as if it was a bubble that might burst at any time. At this moment, the pirate ships also began pushing closer to the Star once again. The 10-odd battleships were surrounding the Star and aiming their cannons at it. However, they did not immediately launch an attack. Obviously, the pirates intended to seize the Star. After all, the counterattack launched by the Star just now had already displayed its extraordinary firepower and performance. However, in the face of the hundreds of cannons on the pirate ships that were ready to fire, Lin Li, who was watching the situation outside with the crowd, did not seem worried in the slightest. It was just a ship which didn't mean much to Lin Li. Even if they wanted the Star to capsize, they wouldn't be able to harm Lin Li and the others. Not to mention Lin Li, an advanced sanctuary powerhouse. The legendary powerhouses like Claws and Elven also had the ability to fly directly to the pirates' ships to create a devastating disaster for them. Although it was unlikely for the pirates to have the support of sanctuary powerhouses, Lin Li was someone not to be trifled with. The main reason why Lin Li did not make a move was to test the fighting ability of the Star. After all, it was only the first time the Star participated in a sea battle. Although Lin Li was knowledgeable and learned, he was not a master shipbuilder, and those involved in the construction of the Star too did not have prior experience in manufacturing such a huge ship. Therefore, Lin Li could only find out the issues with the Star after testing it. At this moment, the pirates' ships were already quite close to the Star, and even the sailors on both decks were able to see each other clearly. There was a pirate standing on the watchtower of the flagship, holding a magic device that would amplify his voice. He yelled, "Those on the ship opposite, listen up, this ship has been taken over by us. All of you, get out of the cabin immediately and put your weapons down. Put your hands on your heads and kneel on the deck." When that pirate shouted, 3 legendary powerhouses in the pilot house of the flagship grinned while sizing up the Star that was soon to become their own. They were the leader and deputy heads of the pirates, and were known to all that made a living at sea. The leader of the pirates was a middle-aged man with a mustache, who was donning the uniform of a naval officer of the Gilded Kingdom. However, there was a skull on the emblem on his chest. Such contemptuous practice against the Gilded Kingdom's navy was considered unique in the Endless Ocean. Those who knew a little about the Endless Ocean would immediately think of the Sea Demon King, Amula. Among the various legends of the Endless Ocean, the Sea Demon King Amula could be considered a very legendary figure that would give even the navy of the Gilded Kingdom a huge headache. He had led a band of pirates named the Sea Demons and dominated the sea for decades. All pray that he had set his sights on wood, never be able to escape. In fact, legend had it that his fleet had been engaged in many battles against the Gilded Kingdom's fleet, and the naval officer uniform that he was wearing was stolen from a Gilded Kingdom's warship after they captured it. The fact that they had the audacity to seize even the Gilded Kingdom's navy ships was evidence of how bold the Sea Demon King was. He often wore that military uniform to mock the Gilded Kingdom's navy. The two people next to the Sea Demon King Amula were just as famous as him in the Endless Ocean. One of them was Jurat, who was known as the Sea's Venom, while the other was Sobnar, who was known as the Serpent of the Sea. The two of them were Amla's most trusted right-hand men, and the deputy heads of the Sea Demons. Chief, we're really lucky today. We were just on a routine rampage, and we managed to catch such a big fish. From the draft of this ship, you can tell how many goods there must be in it. Besides, they're also equipped with so many weapons. They're definitely transporting valuable items, Jurat said excitedly, rubbing his hands together. The Gilded Kingdom's flag was not hung on the star, and they had never seen the emblem on the star before, either. Hence, they reckoned that the star was probably an armed merchant ship from the mainland. We just have to make minor changes to this ship, and it'll be ready to be our new flagship. Its power can be fully exhibited only in our hands. Sobnar was not only the deputy head of Sea Demons, he was also an expert in shipbuilding, who basically modified all the ships of the Sea Demons. Hence, while Jurat was concerned about the value of the goods on board, he was concerned about the value of the ship. In his eyes, the value of the ship was obviously higher than that of the goods. After hearing their words, Amula looked increasingly smug. Not bad. After we get this ship, you'll be in charge of the transformation and modifications. Haha. Don't worry, Chief. This ship is surely going to become our most powerful fortress after I transform it, Sobnar said, patting his chest. Just when the three men were discussing what to do after seizing the star, a pirate ran in from outside and saluted before saying, Chief, those people on that ship are not moving at all. Do you think we are ready to board the ship? However, at this moment, Amula did not give orders immediately, and instead waved his hand to dismiss his subordinates before turning around and going to the rear of the pilot house. It turned out that there was actually a person in a black robe with a large hood that covered his face seated in the pilot house, appearing extraordinarily mysterious. Amula, who was called the Sea Demon King by the outsiders, did not seem arrogant at all. Instead, he saluted the black-robed man respectfully before saying, Lord, the people on that ship are not responding, and we're getting ready to send our men to board the ship and seize it. What do you think? However, the black-robed man did not immediately answer him. After a moment of silence, he assented faintly and agreed to Amla's request. Honestly, this was considered very rude, but Amula did not get angry at all. After hearing the black-robed man's response, he saluted respectfully, and then retreated. Amula, who had returned to the front, regained his arrogant aura, and immediately ordered his subordinates to board the ship and fight. When orders were given out to seize the star on the flagship of the pirates' fleet, the people on the star didn't feel nervous at all. What a joke! They had an advanced sanctuary powerhouse, and a large bunch of peak legendary powerhouses. How could they be shocked by a bunch of pirates? Seems like the Gilded Kingdom's fleet isn't that great, after all. They actually let the pirates come all the way here. Any further and they'll reach their capital. Claus shook his head slightly, looking as if he was finding the Gilded Kingdom's defense pitiful, but he was actually just mocking them. Indeed, the Gilded Kingdom was known as the best kingdom in nautical technology in Anral, which had an invincible fleet across the Endless Ocean. Yet, the pirates actually showed up at their door, and no one of the Gilded Kingdom was present. That was truly a slap in their face. Don't mention that. It seems that we can't make it for dinner on Four Seasons Island. Elvin had already recovered from the impact of the Void Spirit Magath, and began joking with the others. Why, is my cooking terrible? As the chef of the star, Cardson immediately jumped out when he heard that someone wanted to eat elsewhere. Of course, Cardson was just joking. Although he was now a pseudo-sanctuary powerhouse, he didn't have the habit of treating those below the sanctuary realm as insignificant ants, especially since he had been running his own small restaurant, where he would chat happily even with ordinary people. After traveling together on the sea for a while, the others had also gained some understanding of Cardson's character, so they could tell that he wasn't really blaming them. Hence, they started talking to Cardson about the food ingredients of Anral, completely forgetting the matter of being surrounded by pirates. Lin Li couldn't help but shake his head, and half-jokingly chided the technicians who were fixing the battleship's technical issues. Hurry up and get the ship fixed early so we can go to Four Seasons Island for dinner. If you can't fix it, you'll all go hungry at night. However, the pirates outside had already yelled several times at this point. They then started a countdown and threatened to sink them together with the ship if they didn't do as they were told. Finally, Cardson and others got tired of listening to them, and said to Lin Li, Flick, Those guys out there are so noisy. We'd better get rid of them early. Yes, President Flick, we've gained a lot of free benefits throughout this journey. Now, it's time to put in some effort. After saying that, Claus called the others along and left the cabin. When they saw that someone had finally walked out on the star, the pirates on the ship outside thought that they were finally scared and were going to surrender. However, before they could even cheer for long, they suddenly saw those who came out of the cabin flying up into the air. They finally reacted and realized that they were all legendary powerhouses. A few legendary mages on the star flew up into the sky and started waving the staffs in their hands without uttering a single word. They began to pour mana out towards the surrounding pirate ships too. Thunderbolts, ice, flames, and all sorts of magic spells began to light up the place. However, that had become the nightmare of the pirates because they did not expect to encounter so many legendary mages. At the same time that the legendary mages bombarded the pirates' ships with a large number of magic spells, a few legendary sword sages jumped up from the deck of the star. However, they did not fly into the air, and instead landed hard on the decks of several pirate ships like cannonballs. Under the attacks of the 10-odd legendary powerhouses, the pirates who seemed to have an absolute advantage fell from the clouds to the abyss. Those pirates who had been committing arson, murder, and theft at sea became the subject of slaughter this time, and they were all wailing in agony as they fled from the ship. However, even if they jumped into the sea with no qualms about their lives, they would not be able to avoid the fate of getting crushed into bits by the attack spells and combat energy that followed. One by one, the pirate ships began to sink to the bottom of the sea. Some of the pirate ships were engulfed by blazing flames that were still burning intensely even on the surface of the sea. Some of the pirate ships were frozen completely before being chopped into pieces by combat energy that came from dozens of meters away. Some were even worse off as they were shrouded in gray fog. The pirates on the ship wailed in pain and watched themselves age rapidly while the ship decayed and broke down. Although the strength of the legendary powerhouses was not considered much in front of a sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li, they were godlike existences for those below the legendary level. More than 10 legendary powerhouses were simply beyond what those pirates could resist. In about less than 10 minutes, half of the pirates' ships sunk to the bottom of the sea in various ways. At this moment, the Sea Demon King Amula and the others were standing on the pirates' flagship, completely dumbfounded because of the changes going on outside. They could never imagine the origin of the lone battleship on which numerous legendary powerhouses suddenly appeared. They couldn't help but think to themselves that they had probably met a tough opponent this time, seeing that the fleet they had worked so hard to operate was about to be completely destroyed by those legendary powerhouses. Amula finally snapped back to his senses. Without saying anything more to the other two, he turned around and walked towards the back of the pilot house. "Lord, we're really in trouble this time. I need your help to save us, otherwise we," Amula said in a shaky voice. The mysterious man in the pilot house who was wrapped in a black robe finally slowly raised his head, but his face was still concealed by the shadow of the hood. "Tell your people to retreat," the man said before raising his hand to release a magic flare. The magic flare penetrated the ceiling of the pilot house and darted into the sky before exploding with a loud boom, causing a huge maggoth to be drawn in the sky. At the same time, Amula also returned to the front of the pilot house to order his subordinates to retreat. He then took the lead to maneuver the flagship to turn away and flee into the distance at full speed. In fact, the other remaining battleships immediately fled without waiting for Amla's orders. Seeing that the flagship had already left, no one would be silly enough to stay there and wait to die. Instead, they immediately followed the flagship at full speed. However, the 10-odd legendary powerhouses who came down from the star clearly did not intend to let them off so easily. The legendary mages directly used the power of flight to chase after the fleeing pirate ships while still attacking them continuously with offensive spells. The legendary sword sages were not willing to seem weak. Although they could not stay in midair for a long time, flying for a short distance with explosive speed was far better than the power of flight of the legendary mages, as they charged towards the fleeing battleships like cannonballs. During their attempt to escape, the pirates' battleships still could not avoid the fate of sinking to the bottom of the sea. However, just as the people on the star tried to catch up with the flagship that fled at the front, another fleet came over from afar. The fleet of battleships all bore the Gilded Kingdom's flag, and they were obviously the naval fleet that the Gilded Kingdom relied on to traverse the seas. The sudden appearance of the naval fleet of the Gilded Kingdom, which had 15 alchemical battleships and 20-odd iron ships, all sailing over quickly in a neat formation, and revealing the mightiness of dominating the sea, was unexpected. Even if the naval forces of the kingdoms in Anral were combined, they might not be able to compare to this fleet. Upon sight of the naval fleet of the Gilded Kingdom, those on the star, who were chasing the pirates couldn't help but slow down their movements. After all, They were there because they were invited to participate in the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration, not to annihilate the pirates for the Gilded Kingdom. Since the Gilded Kingdom's naval fleet had appeared, they wouldn't bother continuing. At this moment, the Gilded Kingdom's naval fleet, which was fast approaching them, signaled to them in a bid to tell them, "This is the Gilded Kingdom's territory. We order both sides to stop fighting immediately. The navy of the Gilded Kingdom will judge the dispute." The people on the star also simply gave up on pursuing the pirates, and returned to the deck one by one. Anyway, the pirates would die regardless of whether they landed in the hands of the people on the star or the Gilded Kingdom. Hence, they didn't mind letting the Gilded Kingdom show their authority. As the star's crowd stopped chasing, the pirates' flagship and the remaining 2 ships also followed, and stopped, seemingly knowing that it was impossible to escape in this situation. When they saw the few iron battleships of the Gilded Kingdom, they immediately approached, and raised their white flags. Next, the iron battleships of the Gilded Kingdom approached, and the warriors and mages boarded the pirate ship. Soon, the remaining pirates began surrendering. However, after the pirates were disarmed, the fleet was still in a vigilant formation, and they continued to surround the star. In particular, the 15 alchemical battleships soon surrounded the star, and the flagship of the fleet soon signaled a request to board the ship for inspection. "President Felix, it seems that the other party doesn't know our identity yet. Let me go explain to them." Joseph was afraid that Lin Li would lose his temper, and not give the Gilded Kingdom any respect. They were already considered to be in the territory of the Gilded Kingdom. If their relationship was strained, it would not benefit them at all. However, Joseph's worry was obviously a little redundant. Although Lin Li was already a sanctuary powerhouse standing above all at the peak of Anral, he was definitely not a person who liked to cause trouble for nothing. Hence, after Joseph's words, he nodded and said, "Well, please go and greet them then." Hearing Lin Li's words, Joseph secretly heaved a sigh of relief, and hurriedly moved to go up to the flagship of the other fleet. Of course, the flagship of the Gilded Kingdom's fleet was not something that just anyone could go up to. Joseph had to fly into the air and negotiate with them for a long time before he was finally allowed to land on the deck of the battleship. After a while, the flagship of the Gilded Kingdom fleet broke away from the fleet formation and approached the star. Joseph first returned to the ladder to report, after which several boarding bridges were extended to the deck of the star. First, a group of warriors arrived at the deck of the star via the bridge, which then split into 2 lanes. Next, a young officer in his early 30s arrived on the deck of the star, accompanied by elite warriors. The young naval officer had a head full of curly blonde hair and a pair of turquoise eyes. He was rather muscular, but his face was a little pale. However, his strength was a little too inadequate for an officer commanding such a fleet because he hadn't even reached the legendary level. However, the warriors beside him were all level 18 or level 19, and no matter where they were, they would be elites. Even the top forces of the breezy plains like the Mithril Alliance and the Caesar family could not form such a team of elites. They could tell from the elite warriors that although the young naval officer did not have impressive strength, he probably had an extraordinary status in the Gilded Kingdom. Otherwise, even the commander of this fleet would not be qualified to make that team of elite warriors stay on guard. After the young officer came to the deck of the star surrounded by the guards, someone, who looked like a deputy commander, stood out and introduced to the people on the star, "This is Lord Delano, the commander of our kingdom's 5th fleet, the son of High Priest Power." Generally speaking, the children of officials or wealthy men would rarely announce the names of their fathers when introducing themselves. Even the special envoy, Cantori, who was in charge of the development plan of the Gilded Kingdom in the breezy plains, didn't go round reporting his father's name. However, Lord Delano looked extremely arrogant and smug when his subordinates introduced him and his father, clearly not finding anything wrong with it. Hearing the deputy commander's introduction, the people on the star, especially Joseph and other representatives of the forces that cooperated with the Gilded Kingdom, couldn't help but look surprised. They had naturally never heard of Delano before, but they had some understanding of High Priest Power from their interaction with the Gilded Kingdom. High Priest Power was not just a priest of the kingdom, but also the teacher of the king of the Gilded Kingdom, and had an extraordinary status in the Gilded Kingdom. If Cantori had not become a disciple of the priest of the Illuminati, he probably would not be qualified to be compared to Delano and compete with him in terms of whose father was more powerful. After all, no matter how much authority the Chancellor had, it was all given by the king, who had always been very respectful towards High Priest Power. Lin Li was naturally aware of High Priest Power's existence, but he wasn't as surprised as others. After all, sanctuary powerhouses, especially those who were at higher levels, were basically above all else in the world of Anral. Hence, Lin Li barely had any fluctuations in his emotions because of this matter. Even if Delano was the son of the Illuminati priest, Lin Li wouldn't be fazed. Seeing how shocked the others on the star were because of his identity, Delano still felt rather proud even though this had happened to him countless times before. However, when he turned to look at Lin Li, who was standing in the middle of the crowd, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Lin Li's composure seemed to be an eyesore to Delano at this moment, especially because Delano felt that Lin Li was being contemptuous and disdainful of him. Whenever he announced his identity, the people that he faced would immediately seem astonished, be it someone from the Gilded Kingdom or elsewhere. They would also start being extremely respectful towards him, and some would even try to bootlick and flatter him. At this moment, the people on the star had already quickly recovered from the shock. After all, they were all legendary powerhouses, who were considered powerful. Since he was the person who had just communicated with the Gilded Kingdom, Joseph began to introduce the people on his side to the Gilded Kingdom. Delano did not pay much attention to the identities of the people from the breezy plains at all. To him, the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family were just some local forces, and the so-called top forces of the breezy plains were just existences that were akin to the Gilded Kingdom's trade unions or pirates. Delano could not figure out why Cantori still hadn't managed to gain control of the entire breezy plains even though the forces seemed mediocre. If he had been in Cantori's place, he would have just led his military into the breezy plains, without wasting his breath to negotiate. However, Delano was not entirely nonchalant. At least, he was very curious about Lin Li, the young man who he felt was being dismissive of and belittled him. My father is the high priest of the kingdom, and whose identity in the Gilded Kingdom would surely make the hearts of those who hear it tremble. Who would have the right to belittle me? This is President Flick, the president of the Tower of Dusk of the Breezy Plains. The first person Joseph introduced was Lin Li, who was the sanctuary powerhouse that was of utmost importance even though he was very young. After introducing Lin Li, he began to introduce Claws of the Caesar family and Mogadi of the Blood Moon clan, followed by the representatives of the other forces. However, at this point, Delano was no longer listening to Joseph's introduction, because the only thing he wanted to know was the information about the young mage, who dared to belittle his identity. However, after hearing Joseph's introduction, he could not help but sneer and think to himself, I've never even heard of the Tower of Dusk before. Seems like that guy's attitude is completely because of his ignorance. After waiting impatiently for Joseph to finish his introduction of the people on the star, Delano nodded, and then raised his chin slightly to look at the people condescendingly. This is the territory of the Gilded Kingdom. No matter what your dispute is about, it has already threatened the safety of our territorial waters. The other party has already put down their weapons, so I now order you to also immediately lay down your weapons and accept the temporary escort provided by the Fifth Fleet. We will give you a fair and final verdict at the Naval Court when we reach Four Seasons Island. Although legendary powerhouses were powerful, they were still far from being powerful enough to ignore the political powers of the mortal world. In fact, be it the Gilded Kingdom or the mainland kingdoms like Felon Kingdom and Leaden Kingdom, there were quite a few legendary powerhouses working for their regimes. Only sanctuary powerhouses who were near the level of the gods could be considered to be above the world. Although there were quite a few legendary powerhouses on the star, Delano, who had a high status, did not take ordinary legendary powerhouses seriously at all. Delano might be below the legendary level, but he had a father that no one else could compare to. High Priest Power was not someone ordinary legendary powerhouses could afford to provoke. Besides, he was now in control of the powerful Fifth Fleet. If any of them were insensible enough to stand out and offend him, he could easily blast any legendary powerhouse and destroy them. Hence, despite facing so many legendary powerhouses on the star, Delano was still full of confidence, and looked like he was bent on going by the book. After he gave out those instructions, the warriors of the Gilded Kingdom navy around him also immediately got ready for battle. Clearly, if anyone behaved strangely, they would not hesitate to suppress them by force. After hearing Delano's words and seeing the actions of the Gilded Kingdom's navy, the people on the star immediately showed their displeasure. They came here because they were invited to participate in the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration, and not to be provoked. Besides, the fleet they confronted just now obviously belonged to the pirates. Was there still a need for a judge? In this situation, even Joseph, who had always wanted to build friendly relations with the Gilded Kingdom, was rather displeased. However, thinking about Delano's identity, Joseph had no choice but to suppress his displeasure and get ready to go forward to negotiate with Delano because he didn't want to offend High Priest Power of the Gilded Kingdom. However, before Joseph could say anything, Claws of the Caesar family protested in a hostile tone. What? Why do you want us to accept your custody? We are guests invited by the Gilded Kingdom to attend the founding celebration of your nation. Pirates appeared in your territorial waters, and tried to rob us. Not only are you not giving us an apology, you even want to treat us as prisoners. This is outrageous and unreasonable. Exactly. We even helped them to destroy a band of pirates. They should be thanking us. Many agreed with Claus and chimed in after he spoke. Those people were all powerhouses of the breezy plains, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they dominated the breezy plains. Hence, they had never been mistreated and belittled that way before. Hearing the tones of the people who were getting more and more agitated, Delano's face gradually turned sullen too. He had never encountered anyone in the territorial waters of the Gilded Kingdom who dared to disregard him. Hence, he turned to look at the deputy commander beside him, and sternly ordered, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and disarm them, and then take over the ship." He's getting the soldiers to disarm dozens of legendary powerhouses. Does he think that the soldiers are all sanctuary powerhouses? After hearing Delano's words, the people on the star were amused by the absurd command instead of being angry. However, Delano obviously did not think so. Although his warriors were naturally not qualified to fight a group of legendary powerhouses, he was certain that the latter definitely didn't dare to go against the Gilded Kingdom. Besides, Delano also felt that the president of the Tower of Dusk seemed mediocre in strength, but actually had an unusual status among them. Hence, Delano felt that as long as he could subdue Lin Li, the others should be easy to deal with. With Delano's strength that was below the legendary level, he couldn't see what kind of strength Lin Li actually possessed. Moreover, he did not believe that a young man like Lin Li, who was only in his early 20s, could possess any great strength. Therefore, in Delano's opinion, Lin Li was a perfect target for him to establish dominance. Hence, without the slightest hesitation, Delano took a step toward Lin Li in a bid to subdue him. Upon sight of Delano's action, the guards around him immediately followed suit. However, in order not to spoil Delano's mood, they chose not to follow too closely. In fact, they didn't think that Lin Li, the young mage who seemed to have weak magical waves, would pose any threat to Delano. As Delano approached Lin Li, he cast a water series restraining spell without saying anything at all. Actually, the spell simply created a massive ball of water that would drown ordinary people who were trapped in it in a short period of time. However, the spell was only at level 10, which would not be effective on archmages that were above level 15, let alone Lin Li, a sanctuary powerhouse. Actually, if it was merely a failure of the restraining spell, it wouldn't be considered much, but as a sanctuary powerhouse, Lin Li had already put up numerous potent passive defensive magic spells around him that were. Hence, Lin Li didn't have to pay much attention to it. As long as he was attacked, the spells would immediately launch a counterattack or put up a defense. Hence, very few in Anral could sneak an attack on a sanctuary master. Delano thought he had found an easy target, but he didn't expect to have met a tough opponent. As soon as the spell flew near Lin Li, a ray of light flashed from his body abruptly while he didn't bat a single eyelid, followed by a series of magic runes that appeared out of thin air, instantly extinguishing the restraining spell. However, that was not the end of it. As the restraining spell vanished, the defensive magic spell on Lin Li's body erupted too, and blasted at Delano immediately. It was because Delano was too weak, and only managed to cast a level 10 restraining spell, that it didn't trigger a powerful retaliation from Lin Li. Instead, it only resulted in some repulsion. Otherwise, the entire Fifth Fleet would turn into ashes immediately. Even so, the shocking force of the counterattack was not something Delano could resist, and he was blown away forcefully before he could figure out what had happened. However, the guards behind Delano reacted rather quickly. As soon as they realized that something was amiss, they immediately tried to catch him lest he was blasted into the sea. However, the guards were only at level 18 or level 19, and stopping the sanctuary powerhouse from retreating, or someone moving with equal force, was not an easy matter, either. The guards almost used all their strength, and only managed to pull Delano up after the last few were squeezed into the sea. However, after pulling Delano up, the guards did not catch their breath yet, and they suddenly felt that there was something wrong with Delano. In the past, the latter would have stomped his feet and cursed out loud whenever he suffered a loss like that, yet he was so quiet now. The two guards at the front who were holding Delano were out of breath after being smashed, but they could no longer be bothered to care about their own state. Instead, they hurried to check Delano's condition. They were stunned by Delano's appearance. At this moment, Delano no longer looked as arrogant as he used to be, as his face was extremely pale, and he lay on the ground with his eyes tightly shut. He had passed out because of the impact. Besides, there was blood flowing out of the corners of his eyes, nostrils, mouth, and ears. He was obviously severely wounded. Delano was the son of High Priest Por. If something terrible happened to him here, they wouldn't escape the blame, either. Seeing the situation, the guards immediately got into a frenzy. Some were calling Delano's name desperately, while some were hugging him and shaking him violently. On the other hand, the warriors of the Fifth Fleet, All thought Delano had died. When they saw how flustered the guards were, one by one, they unsheathed their swords and surrounded the star. Although they had just heard that the people who came from Anral were very likely to be guests who had been invited to the founding celebration, even the nobles of the Gilded Kingdom itself could not escape the wrath of High Priest Power, let alone the outsiders. At this juncture, the people on the star were indeed a little nervous. After all, they also knew that Delano was the son of the High Priest of the Gilded Kingdom. If something really happened to Delano, the Gilded Kingdom would probably fall out with the Breezy Plains. Some of them were already thinking that they should kill the warriors of the Gilded Kingdom, and that they wouldn't have to attend the founding celebration after offending the High Priest of the Gilded Kingdom. Hence, they could just return to the Breezy Plains to prepare for the war. All of a sudden, the atmosphere on the deck of the star became a bit tense, as if a single spark would cause a big explosion. At this moment, in the capital of the Gilded Kingdom on Four Seasons Island, there was an extremely beautiful and opulent alchemical battleship sailing slowly into the sea. Strictly speaking, the alchemical battleship could no longer be considered a battleship, because there were almost no decent weapons installed on board. It looked just like a luxurious cruise ship. There was a middle-aged man wearing a blue magic robe standing on the deck of the luxurious cruise ship with a few diplomatic officials from the Gilded Kingdom, inspecting the various arrangements on the ship. After walking around, an official of the Gilded Kingdom respectfully said to the blue-robed middle-aged man, "Lord Forcas, please rest assured, everything here has been arranged in accordance with your instructions, and is in line with the standards of the nation. They will not feel neglected in the slightest." Okay. Forcas nodded slightly, but there was a vague nervousness in his expression because he knew very well in his heart that the person he was going to see this time was not simple, and he could not afford to make the slightest mistake. The few officials beside Forcas looked extremely confused, but they were carrying out Forcas' instructions attentively. They really couldn't imagine what kind of guest would be able to warrant the personal welcome of Forcas. Although Forcas was not an official of the Gilded Kingdom, nor was he a royal, his status was extraordinary in the Gilded Kingdom, because his teacher was Elder Zoomer of the Illuminati. In the Gilded Kingdom, the Illuminati was equivalent to the Brilliant Shrine of the Leaden Kingdom, or the Supreme Council in the Felon Kingdom. It was an existence that overrode the forces of the mortal world. The priest of the Illuminati was like a god worshipped by the nation of the Gilded Kingdom, and was not comparable to any king or minister. Zoomer was one of the most authoritative elders of the Illuminati, and since Forcas was Elder Zoomer's disciple, he naturally wouldn't be taken lightly, either. That was exactly what the officials of the Gilded Kingdom could not figure out. With Forcas' status, he probably wouldn't receive others personally even if they were kings of the other kingdoms. Besides, Forcas did not represent only himself, but also Elder Zoomer, and, in fact, even the entire Illuminati. It was beyond the imagination of those people. However, a sailor suddenly scurried over with a flustered expression. "Lord Forcas, look over there. There seems to be some debris of a wrecked ship floating over." What? Forcas was astonished. He had never heard of a storm on the sea recently. Why would there be a wrecked ship? However, he thought that since the person he had to receive was a sanctuary powerhouse, whose strength was not inferior to that of his teacher, who was in the sanctuary realm, he wouldn't be in danger even if there was a storm. As expected, a sailor soon came over to report that they had found some traces of the ship that seemed to belong to the pirates from the debris of the wrecked ship that they had found. As the battleship sailed, more and more debris appeared on the sea, along with a number of mutilated corpses that attracted a large number of bloodthirsty fish. The attire on those corpses also clearly showed their identity as pirates. "Lord Forcas, it seems to be a certain band of pirates. This area is under the jurisdiction of the Fifth Fleet. It seems that the Fifth Fleet is conducting a purge," an official from the Gilded Kingdom said to Forcas with a respectful expression. "These pirates are really foolish. How dare they come here? Are they really poor?" Looking at the pirate corpses that the fishes were fighting for, many of them were laughing and gloating. However, when Forcas heard this, his expression suddenly changed, and he said, "If I remember correctly, the commander of the Fifth Fleet seems to be Delano, right?" "Yes, Lord, the commander of the Fifth Fleet is indeed Delano, the son of High Priest Power," the person beside him answered with some confusion. Although Delano was the son of the High Priest of the Gilded Kingdom, there was still a difference between him and Forcas, Elder Zoomer's disciple. He reckoned that Forcas wouldn't feel scrupulous. However, Forcas' reaction was completely beyond their expectations, and his tone was full of anxiety. "Quick, don't waste any more time. Charge forward immediately at full speed." Forcas appeared again, this time because of his teacher Elder Zoomer's orders. He was there to meet the guests from the breezy plains, especially the young president of the Tower of Dusk, who was his top priority during this mission. He could not neglect it at all. It was not only because of his teacher Elder Zoomer's instructions. In fact, Forcas was also involved in the battle on Cage Island. Hence, it was clear to him how terrifying the strength of the young president was. He was a sanctuary powerhouse, whose strength wasn't inferior to that of his teacher Elder Zoomer, and who was definitely a powerful existence that was at the pinnacle of Anral. That was the reason that Forcas had been checking the battleship dozens of times along the way, not daring to neglect any details at all. He was afraid that the Tower of Dusk might think that he was being negligent. Besides, more importantly, Forcas knew that the relationship between the Tower of Dusk and the Gilded Kingdom was not too cordial. Thus, it was possible for the Tower of Dusk to find a random excuse to make things hard for them. Now, Forcas was really flustered. If the Tower of Dusk encountered pirates, the pirates would be doomed, and the Gilded Kingdom would just be mocked for having poor security in their territorial waters. However, if they encountered Delano, there would be a huge issue. Since Forcas was part of Delano's circle, he was naturally well aware of Delano's personality. Although he was the commander of the 5th Fleet in name, he was actually just a scion who liked throwing his weight around and abusing his authority because his father was the high priest. If an arrogant man like him would receive guests politely, pigs would fly. Besides, the president of the Tower of Dusk was extremely young, and no one would believe that he was a sanctuary powerhouse upon their first meeting. Delano might really cause issues. Finally, with the battleship sailing at full speed, a fleet that had set up a battle formation finally appeared in front of Forcas. After looking at the situation, Forcas' heart sank, and he immediately sprung up from the deck of the battleship, flying towards the side. While flying, he also kept praying in his heart that things would not develop in the direction he feared. However, as the scene ahead became clearer and clearer, Forcas' heart sank further and further. He could already see the tension on the battleship in the middle. It seemed that a conflict between the two parties had already broken out. However, there was one thing that made Forcas feel comforted. There was at least some room for easing the tension. That meant that the young president of the Tower of Dusk had yet to fall out with the Gilded Kingdom. Otherwise, with the strength of the high-level sanctuary powerhouse, they would have defeated and annihilated the 5th Fleet at any time. Everyone, please calm down, don't do anything, Forcas shouted loudly while flying down to the deck of the Star. Lord Forcas, please be sure to avenge us. Not only did this group of people refuse to accept our inspection, they even shot and injured our commander. Delano's deputy commander exclaimed, greeting Elder Zoomer's disciple Forcas joyously as soon as he saw him landing on the deck. Since Forcas could become the disciple of Elder Zoomer, he naturally had great talent too. Although he couldn't compare to Cantor yet, his strength was also close to the peak of the legendary realm. Hence, when he saw Forcas, the deputy commander of Delano immediately became more confident. Initially, Forcas felt rather thankful when he saw that the people on the Star were all right. As long as there were no casualties, verbal disputes could still be settled and resolved. However, he immediately heard the deputy commander saying something about taking revenge for Delano, and his heart tensed up. He thought Delano was killed. No matter what, Delano was the son of High Priest Power of the Gilded Kingdom. If he died there, it would definitely be troublesome. However, Forcas soon heard the deputy commander saying again that Delano was merely wounded, which was to his relief. However, the worry in his heart did not vanish because of it. Everything seemed to be fine on his side, but the main thing was not his own side, but what Lin Li and his people thought. Regardless of whether Delano died or not, it at least showed that both parties had already made a move against each other, and that was indeed troublesome. They were facing a sanctuary powerhouse, whom not everyone could offend. If they really angered Lin Li, there would definitely be a huge disaster in the Gilded Kingdom. Master Flick, I am here to greet you and your guests from the breezy plains on behalf of my teacher, Elder Zoomer. They do not know your identity and have caused some misunderstanding. Please do not take it to heart. Forcas didn't bother to look at Delano, who had already passed out. Instead, he went forth to apologize to Lin Li respectfully. Initially, the people from the 5th Fleet were thinking that Forcas was there to give them support and back them up, and they didn't expect Forcas to behave in such a manner. It truly made them dumbfounded. As a disciple of Elder Zoomer of the Illuminati, Forcas had a higher status than Delano. Why did he apologize to the outsiders without even getting a clear understanding of what had happened? Besides, they were even more surprised by the meaning of Forcas' words. It seemed that Elder Zoomer was very familiar with the outsiders, otherwise he wouldn't let his disciple come to greet them on his behalf. On the other hand, Lin Li heard Forcas' words on the Star, but he didn't have much of an expression, and instead nodded very calmly. In fact, He did not have much of an emotional fluctuation. To him, Delano was just like a mob who wasn't significant enough to affect his mood. Seeing that Lin Li did not seem to blame them, Forcas finally felt secretly relieved. Hence, he apologized and turned around to get them to wake Delano up in a bid to make Delano apologize to the other side. He thought that that would be a good solution. Actually, Delano did not suffer any severe injury, and he was mainly just too weak as he simply passed out. Of course, if he had been stronger, the counterattack would have been more powerful, and perhaps he would have been killed in one fell swoop. With everyone's joint efforts, they splashed water and slapped Delano, and the latter finally snorted before opening his eyes with some confusion. He was still a little puzzled about the situation as he didn't know how he'd suddenly fainted. Only when he saw the faces of his subordinates around him did he suddenly remember where he was. Delano suddenly stood up and hollered at his subordinates without even noticing that Forcas had arrived. "What are all of you doing? They actually had the audacity to attack the commander of the 5th Fleet, and that's an act of war against my kingdom. Hurry up and take them down." If it had been in the past, the subordinates around Delano would have definitely carried out his instructions without hesitation. However, to Delano's surprise, they seemed to be in a dilemma after hearing his order. Those people were not fools, and they weren't willing to attack legendary powerhouses in the first place. They could tell from the fate of the pirates how they would end up. "Delano, what are you talking about? Hurry up and apologize to Master Flick." Forcas was frightened to the point of turning pale after hearing Delano's words. He was initially already troubled by the invitation, and yet Delano thought of continuing to stir trouble. That was adding fuel to fire. Seeing that his subordinates were not listening to his orders, Delano was about to lose his temper, but at this moment, Forcas' voice came through the crowd and reached his ears. Delano was first stunned, after which he rubbed his ears hard, thinking that he was hallucinating because of the injury that he had just sustained. However, in the next moment, the people around him quickly flashed and darted to the sides. He saw Forcas walking towards him furiously. Although Delano's father was a high priest, and Delano could be considered one of the top figures among the younger generation of the Gilded Kingdom, he did not have supreme status. For example, Cantori, the disciple of the priest of the Illuminati, was not only of high status, but was also known as the best genius of the Gilded Kingdom. That was far from what Delano could compare to. Another example would be Forcas, the disciple of Elder Zoomer, who definitely surpassed him in terms of status and strength. Therefore, when facing Forcas, Delano also had to lower his pride and deferentially ask, "Lord Forcas, what brings you here?" "Delano, Master Flick, and these representatives of the various forces of the Breezy Plains are our distinguished guests who have been invited to attend the founding celebration." "Delano, it's fine if you did not know before, but now that you do, you should be going over to apologize for offending them." In fact, Forcas was giving Delano an out on account of Delano's father. However, Delano refused. Succumbing to Forcas did not mean that he was willing to submit to just anyone else. Besides, in the situation just now, he had fainted because of Lin Li's defensive spells. How could he be willing to be embarrassed in front of so many subordinates? Hence, Delano cringed and said, "Lord Forcas, you probably do not understand the situation. This group of people got into a conflict with others on our territory. We just wanted both parties to stop and accept the judgment of the naval court. However, they not only refused to listen to our arrangements, but also shot and injured me. It doesn't matter that I got injured, but this is an insult to the Gilded Kingdom." "Shut up." As soon as he heard Delano's words, Forcas stopped him from speaking. He then said to the people around him, "Take your commander away and check his body. He probably isn't back to his senses yet." Although Forcas was not a member of the fleet, the status of the Illuminati still had a great influence on the people of the Gilded Kingdom. Besides, those warriors were initially not willing to fight with a group of legendary powerhouses anyway. After hearing Forcas' command, they immediately pulled the noisy Delano away to the 5th Fleet. Soon, almost everyone of the 5th Fleet had already left the deck of the Star. Only then did Forcas approach Lin Li again with a wry smile. "Master Flick, I'm really sorry. Delano has been spoiled rotten by his father, and he made a fool out of himself here." By saying this, Forcas made Delano seem like Lin Li Jr., thus making it inappropriate for Lin Li to blame him. Of course, using such tricks depended on the subject. If it was the past Lin Li, he might not give in. However, as a sanctuary powerhouse, who stood at the peak of Anral, like a god that looked down on the living beings, Lin Li found Delano's actions to be like a joke. Hence, he naturally wouldn't take it to heart. After some pleasantries, Forcas explained his agenda. At this moment, the opulent battleship also sailed over. Although Lin Li had the Star, he still led the representatives of the forces of the Breezy Plains, and stepped onto the luxurious battleship that was supposedly meant for welcoming them out of courtesy. Of course, after stepping on the battleship of the Gilded Kingdom, he inevitably faced some diplomatic conversations. The Gilded Kingdom applied the standards of international meetings in receiving Lin Li and the representatives of the forces of the Breezy Plains, thus making the representatives of the forces of the Breezy Plains feel a bit flattered. However, Lin Li did not feel much about it. Clearly, be it the Gilded Kingdom or the Illuminati, they clearly hoped that they could maintain peace with the forces of the Breezy Plains, and the Tower of Dusk in particular, for a period of time. On the battleship of the Gilded Kingdom, Forcas enthusiastically introduced the customs of the kingdom to Lin Li. Whenever the battleship passed by an island, he would have a lot of legends to tell Lin Li. Besides, the closer they got to Four Seasons Island, the more islands there were in the sea. Some were larger, and thus had cities that were as large as Anral. 1. Built on them. 1. That's what the Raw say, obviously a typo of Alana or some other city. There were islands that were as small as towns or villages from the mainland of Anral, and were inhabited by only a few households. There were also islands with unique sceneries that only had one castle on them. They were obviously owned by the nobles of the Gilded Kingdom, but there was one notable thing about the islands surrounding the main navigation route. All of them were bustling with energy regardless of their surface area. There were countless large and small ships sailing in and out of the many ports, and large alchemy machinery were loading and unloading cargo from the ships. On the way, Lin Li and the others were also invited by Forcas to stop by a few of the more popular islands owned by the Gilded Kingdom. They got to witness the Gilded Kingdom culture firsthand, and were invited to celebrate the Independence Day in the Gilded Kingdom. Of course, the scenery they saw was only a small part of the Gilded Kingdom. The defining feature of Gilded Kingdom was its capital that was located on Four Seasons Island, the cultural and political hub of Gilded Kingdom. Although people tended to associate Four Seasons Island with the capital of Gilded Kingdom, the area of the island was as huge as half of Felon Kingdom. In addition to the capital of the Gilded Kingdom, there were also dozens of large and small cities. Moreover, there was no extreme weather on the island at all. It was made up of 4 seasons of spring and filled with bird chatter and the smell of blossoms. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a fairyland on Earth. When the battleship and the star slowly steered into the biggest port of the Gilded Kingdom, Helenaport, they found themselves received by a large-scale welcoming ceremony. A long red carpet had been rolled all the way to the pier, and Navy guards stood neat on the sides of the carpet and played melodious music with elements that resembled the Dark Ages music. The officials of Helenaport as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Gilded Kingdom were standing on the dock, awaiting the arrival of Lin Li and the others. Although the forces from the Breezy Plains were each a hegemon of one of its regions, the grand ceremony made them feel like savages setting foot in the city. After all, such a high-quality ceremony was usually only conducted between kingdoms to welcome ministers of foreign affairs. It was not something that these forces would commonly experience. Master Philic, our Majesty, the king of our country, is very happy to hear that you have accepted our invitation. Therefore, he has specifically ordered us to welcome you all with a ceremony that is of the highest standard, Forcas explained as he stood beside Lin Li. Lin Li nodded and remained silent. He stepped onto the red carpet and led the representatives of the other Breezy Plains forces out of the pier under the guidance of Forcas. To be honest, Lin Li had never experienced or witnessed such a grand scene. If it had been in the past, he would have felt very lost now. However, now that he was already a sanctuary powerhouse, these objects of vanity could hardly cause the slightest excitement in his heart. Behind Lin Li, Claus, Joseph, and the other representatives of the various forces from the Breezy Plains couldn't help but feel a little nervous despite being all legendary powerhouses. After all, they would not have received such niceties if they had come to Gilded Kingdom alone. They were very clear that the ceremony was conducted for Lin Li, and they merely shared the spotlight. The music played by the Royal Military Orchestra engulfed the entire pier, with a majestic yet solemn atmosphere. After the music stopped, more than 24 salutes, sounded continuously, bringing the entire welcoming ceremony to a climax. The number of salutes clearly represented the high status of its guests as well as the great importance Gilded Kingdom placed on them. In order to welcome Lin Li and the representatives of the various forces of the Breezy Plains, the Gilded Kingdom definitely put a lot of effort into the welcoming ceremony. The scale of the ceremony was unprecedented, and this naturally invited speculation from countless people. It was difficult for them to imagine whom the Gilded Kingdom would greet with such a grand reception. At the same time, Sea Dragon from the Fifth Fleet appeared silently near Helenaport. On the observation platform of the battleship, Delano and his adjutants and several other officers of the Fifth Fleet were also watching the commotion at the pier. The Fifth Fleet had its own naval port, but Delano was not a person willing to take any losses. Furthermore, The humiliation he experienced in front of so many followers felt more uncomfortable than death. Therefore, after ordering the other battleships to return to the military port, he let the Fifth Fleet's flagship enter Helena port from a distance. He wanted to find out why Phorcys would want to greet the people from the breezy plains in person. Delano knew that these people were representatives of various local forces in the breezy plains, from an introduction in the past. This was what made him not give the group any importance despite the grand welcoming ceremony they were given. Every Gilded Kingdom Independence Day celebration would attract big and tiny forces from all directions. Therefore, it was not a big deal to be invited to the celebration. Being invited did not mean that they were valued more highly than one another. Delano was highly suspicious of the relationship between Phorcys and the president of Tower of Dusk. Otherwise, how would Phorcys greet the latter in person? The borrowing of a luxuriously decorated battleship for this purpose was not a problem with Phorcys' status. As Phorcys was not to be trifled with, it would be impossible for him to take revenge on the president if Phorcys was involved. Of course, Delano was a little dumbfounded when he saw the grand welcoming ceremony from the platform he was standing on. Phorcys' status was not ordinary, but it would not be easy for anyone to conduct a welcoming ceremony of such a large scale. If there was not enough reason for the ceremony, Phorcys would be impeached by the ministers even if he were the disciple of Elder Zoomer. Damn it, who the hell is that kid? How did he manage to make Phorcys organize such a grand ceremony to welcome him? Delano said through gritted teeth as he threw an angry fist on the guardrail. Delano was not a fool. The sight of the welcoming ceremony was enough to help him realize that the identity of these people from the breezy plains was unlike that of the usual attendees of the Independence Day celebration. They had to be formally invited guests who were held in high regard by the king. It definitely would not be easy for him to seek revenge if they had the support from the royals of the kingdom. Although Delano had an amazing father, it didn't mean that he could be unscrupulous in the Gilded Kingdom, especially if the royal family was involved. If the people from the breezy plains were really important guests of the royal family, he would be asking for a beating if he were to seek trouble with them. If that were to happen, his father would definitely not forgive him. While Delano was determined not to give up on revenge, he could only look in the direction of the dock with a gloomy face. "My lord, are you worried about the difficulty of seeking revenge?" asked Delano's adjutant knowingly. "Unless you have any thoughts about this," responded Delano. He knew that his adjutant had to have an idea around the situation for him to come forward. "My lord, we can do it like this," Hadji said as he smiled and leaned towards Delano's ear to whisper his idea. "Well, good idea, let's do it," exclaimed Delano excitedly with a glow in his eyes as he nodded profusely. Hadji's suggestion took Delano's gloominess away. Lin Li and the others left Helena port with Phorcys after the ceremony on a luxurious carriage to Hupra, the capital of the Gilded Kingdom, that was located on Four Seasons Island. Although labeled as a carriage, the vehicle operated using alchemical power. To Lin Li, it resembled a car from the world he was in before transmigrating. The speed of an alchemy carriage was naturally much faster than that of an ordinary one, and it was also very stable when traveling at high speeds. Hupra was not in the center of Four Seasons Island, but rather located slightly closer to Helena port. This was also one of the reasons why they chose to welcome Lin Li there. Therefore, they took only half a day to see the majestic city walls of Hupra City. Otherwise, with the enormous area of Four Seasons Island, it would have taken 4 to 5 days to reach the central area with the speed of this carriage. Although Lin Li and the others lost a lot of time at sea, there was still a long way to go before the Independence Day celebration. However, there was a festive atmosphere everywhere throughout their journey, and they could see every single civilian beaming with joy. Preparations for the celebration had already begun in Hupra City. For instance, holiday decorations were hanging on city buildings, and there were many temporary stages built to prepare for festive performances. The shops on both sides of the streets hung out slogans that screamed celebratory phrases and rolled out many holiday discounts for their customers. Furthermore, the buildings in Hupra City, the cultural and political center of Gilded Kingdom, had inherited the elements of the Dark Age. It did not matter which social class the buildings belonged to. Not only extravagant and luxurious apartments, but also civilian houses emitted grace and elegance. They were picturesque. The residents of Hupra City also donned costumes that had strong Dark Age elements. No one among the foreign guests knew if this was casual street fashion or festive clothing, yet they could tell the contrast in fashion between Helena Port and the capital's streets. The people at the port were dressed in clothing closer to modern fashion, despite the Dark Age styles. Lin Li and the rest couldn't help but gaze at the streets of Hupra in admiration. Even Lin Li himself started to fantasize that he would have happily settled down in the beautiful city if he had been an ordinary person. However, Lin Li also knew that this site had to be a facade, for there would always be dirty corners hidden from the sun. While the city seemed to be full of grace and elegance, there had to be the darker sides that the people of Hupra weren't aware of. Since the people in the Gilded Kingdom were all caught up with the preparation of the celebration, the king of the Gilded Kingdom didn't have time to meet Lin Li yet. Hence, Forcas brought Lin Li and the rest directly to the luxurious apartments that they had prepared for them. After helping Lin Li and the rest settle down, Forcas apologized to everyone that he had to return to his teacher, Elder Zoomer. However, before leaving, he deliberately assigned some followers to arrange tour guides to bring them around. Lin Li and the rest were either sanctuary or legendary powerhouses. Although they had been sailing on the sea for a long time, no one felt worn out by it. Hence, they did not plan to take a break after Forcas' departure. Instead, they found their own guides and were ready to explore Hepper City. This time, Lin Li did not bring his 2 undead followers here, and the sailors of the Star were still on the ship. He called no one when he left his apartment and started to wander aimlessly in Hupper City. 1. Probably it's about gun salutes, or something of the sort. However, Lin Li was not exactly wandering aimlessly, either. He went to the specialty shops that sold items from the Endless Sea. Of course, there were too many special items in the Gilded Kingdom, ranging from small saltwater fish to herbs and gems from the deep sea. Not all of them were of value to Lin Li. Although it was just a simple tour, Lin Li had to admit that it really felt like an eye-opener. He was shocked to discover that the sea crystal that was considered extremely rare in Anral was a very common gem here, and cost the same as the common ones in Anral. Those deep-sea herbs were also very attractive to Lin Li, a pharmaceutics guru. For example, the dark soul grass, which was very difficult to obtain in the mainland of Anral, was a herb that only grew in the crevices that were thousands of meters deep. Yet, it was sold like cabbage in this city. It was just that the dark soul grass here contained a lot of water elements that had to be extracted if Lin Li were to use it to make potions. In fact, this was not a characteristic unique to dark soul grass. Many kinds of herbs sold here were rich in water elements, even those that grew on remote islands. In addition to herbs and gems, there were also many other precious marine products, such as strange-looking monsters that were unrecognizable to Lin Li. There was a horned turtle that was as huge as a house displayed in the market sold as ordinary livestock. The butchers would cut the turtle flesh according to the orders of their customers and pack it neatly for them. It was said that the largest of its kind was as huge as a small island. Some of them were also domesticated to act as a foundation for people to build their castles on. Lin Li walked around various markets in Hupper City and purchased some fancy items. However, he wasn't making large-scale purchases. It was more to satisfy his curiosity, or for purposes he knew would be beneficial to him. This was also because he still remembered from Elder Zoomer's invitation letter that there would be a once-in-a-decade sea market sale closer to the celebration date. Although Lin Li still did not know what the sea market of the Gilded Kingdom would look like, the sight of the lively markets here instilled in him great expectations for the upcoming sea market. It was said that the sea market would not only attract merchants of the Gilded Kingdom, but also caravans from the mainland of Anral and people living in the depths of the endless ocean. Yet, they were not the main highlights of the event. It was said that there would be a visit from the merchant from the mysterious continent on the other end of the endless ocean. He would be here to sell various specialty goods that were produced on that continent. The sky gradually grew darker as Lin Li strolled through several markets. That was when he decided to return to the residence arranged by the Gilded Kingdom. However, when he returned, he discovered that the afternoon had brought over some new guests, and he identified a number of acquaintances among them. Haha, Master Flick, I heard about your arrival a long time ago, and I have been wanting to pay you a visit, but in vain. Looks like you have gone out on your own. The voice belonged to the owner of the time consignment store, William. Although William was a man of high status in the breezy plains, he did not arrive by the Star, but a fleet of ships instead. It was obvious that he was prepared to visit the sea market and return with rare purchases. Hey, Master Flick, it has been long. This was Prince Lionheart Jonathan, a famous royal of the Felon Kingdom. He had been chatting with William, and when he saw Lin Li, he immediately walked over to greet him enthusiastically. Although Jonathan didn't have much contact with Lin Li, he probably met him at one of the meetings held by the Pharmacists Union. He was also present during Lin Li's inauguration ceremony as a representative of the Felon Kingdom. However, at that time, Jonathan had not thought that this young magician would have had such an achievement. Not only did Lin Li lead the Tower of Dusk to become the most powerful force in the breezy plains, he also successfully stepped into the sanctuary realm to become the youngest sanctuary powerhouse in history. Therefore, when greeting Lin Li, Jonathan could not help but still feel a little worried even though he was a royal of the Felon Kingdom. After all, his status as a prince was nothing to a sanctuary powerhouse. However, Lin Li didn't put up an arrogant stance. Despite being a sanctuary powerhouse, he responded to Jonathan smilingly and greeted the others behind him. Flick, long time no see. I heard that you have acquired Immortal King's Sky Castle, and I would love to pay you a visit over there. A voice addressed Lin Li directly by his name. Few dared to call his name after Lin Li stepped into the sanctuary realm. The owner of the voice, High Priest Sendros from the Darkness Shrine, walked towards Lin Li. Master Sendros, you, said Lin Li before Sendros came up close to him. He could feel the unique aura of a sanctuary realm powerhouse from Sendros. He knew very clearly that Sendros' level up was not a fluke. Unlike with Elvis and the rest, Sendros was a real middle-ranking sanctuary powerhouse. All thanks to your tribute of darkness. Otherwise, I could have only been half of a sanctuary powerhouse, replied Sendros. Now that his body had darkened due to the tribute of darkness, his original stiff expression had transformed into one that seemed gentler. Flick, you were really biased. How could you help this dead face formulate the tribute of darkness? There, look at how arrogant he has become. That was Inglos, the Archbishop of the Brilliant Shrine, who had arrived with Sendros. While he had small talk with everyone, Lin Li could not help but be distracted by his thoughts. He felt that it was not a big deal for the people of Felon to be here. What mattered was the status of those powerhouses from the Darkness Shrine and Brilliant Shrine. One was a high priest in the sanctuary realm, while the other was an archbishop who was a step away from the sanctuary realm. In any case, the Gilded Kingdom was a secular kingdom, and the two shrines were the real forces of influence. Lin Li did not believe that the two men of such status would want to attend the Gilded Kingdom's Independence Day. However, Lin Li did not ask them about their intentions. After all, no matter how good they were on private terms, they had the interests of different forces to consider. Therefore, he suppressed his curiosity and continued chatting with a few people. He also invited Inglos and Sendros to his Sky Castle after this event. While Lin Li had a very happy chat with his old friends, someone was not feeling the same on the other side. Delano had just returned to the naval harbor on Sea Dragon to hear that Forcas had reached the headquarters of the fleet and wanted him to head back immediately. Upon hearing this news, Delano could already guess what Forcas was about to do, but now that Sea Dragon had already entered the port, he knew it was too late to hide. He could only bite the bullet and go meet Forcas. Master Forcas, I heard that you were in a hurry to meet me, said Delano sincerely with as much innocence as he could muster. While he was unafraid of Forcas, he knew Forcas' mentor, Elder Zoomer, was not someone to offend. If he were to get into his bad books, Delano knew that even his father would not be able to protect him. Delano, your fleet has returned quite some time ago. What was taking you such a long time? Asked Forcas in a harsh tone. I was just patrolling around, Delano replied casually. How could he reveal his intentions of seeking revenge on that group of people who came from the breezy plains? However, Forcas was not a foolish man. I don't care where you have gone. Now I just need you to give me an explanation. Who gave you the permission to harass the guests from the breezy plains? They are the guests of His Majesty and the Illuminati, reprimanded Forcas sternly as he sized Delano up with a grave expression. Master Forcas, you can't say that. As the commander of the Fifth Fleet, I am responsible to maintain the peace and stability in our kingdom's waters. They had a conflict in our waters, so there was nothing wrong for me to intervene. It was them. Not only were they indifferent to our mediation, they also used force to resist our management. This behavior has infringed the rules of our territory, protested Delano as he shifted the blame to the others. He even labeled the guests as intruders. If it had been an average person, he would have been fooled by Delano's righteous facade. Forcas was so clear about Delano's character that he didn't believe his rhetoric at all. However, Forcas was not concerned about whom the responsibility belonged to. Since things had happened, the most important thing was to prevent Delano from causing any more trouble. As a result, Forcas did not bother to find fault with Delano's words. Instead, he warned him directly. Delano, no matter what happened previously, I want you to remember that those from the breezy plains, especially people like President Flick, are in extremely good books of both the royal family and the Illuminati. You'd better not create any trouble for me, otherwise don't blame me for not warning you. Master Forcas, if that is what you are saying, do you mean that we have to close our eyes to whatever crimes they are going to commit in our territory? Just when did our Gilded Kingdom become such a pushover? And those people are merely from the breezy plains. Are we going to kneel before them if they are from the Leaden and Felon Kingdom? Replied Delano indignantly.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.